Most people think they wake up in the morning, but in reality, they're just continuing from yesterday. Not with their body, with momentum, unfinished thoughts, familiar worries, pressures that were never really set down. You open your eyes, and before you have a chance to choose, the day has already started for you. Not with a decision, but with a pattern you already know. There's a question almost no one ever asks. Who actually starts my day? Not on my calendar, not in my plans, but in my mind. Many people believe they are in control. They have a job, they have a schedule, they have responsibilities, they have goals. But there's a subtle difference between having a schedule and having the right to start your own day. Two people can wake up at the same time, do the same things, drink the same cup of coffee, and yet their experience of the day can feel completely different. One feels like they are stepping into the day. The other feels like they are being pulled into it. No one talks about this, but your body knows. There is a very small moment that almost everyone misses, the moment before you truly begin doing. In that moment, if you are not present, something else will be present for you. Not another person, but an older version of you. The version that learned to be rushed. The version that learned to worry ahead of time. The version that learned to brace for pressure. The version that learned to live in must. Not because you wanted to live this way, but because you lived this way long enough for it to become your default way of starting. You don't choose it every morning. It chooses you. This is something most people never realize. Today does not really start this morning. It started a long time ago. In the days when you had to hurry to keep up. In the seasons when you had to tense up to survive. In the times when reacting fast felt safer than slowing down. Those ways once made sense. They once protected you. They once helped you get through. But your mind doesn't automatically update. It keeps the old pattern and carries it into every morning. Until one day, you no longer see it as a pattern. You start to believe it is who you are. I'm just someone who worries. I'm just someone who's always in a rush. I'm just someone who's never really at ease. No one tells you this. Very often, that's not who you are. That's a state that lasted long enough to be mistaken for an identity. There is a quiet cost to this. Not loud, not obvious, not written on any to-do list. It's the slow loss of the feeling that you are the one setting the rhythm of your day. You don't feel like the one beginning. You feel like the one keeping up. Keeping up with emails, keeping up with messages, keeping up with demands, keeping up with expectations. Not because you are weak, but because your position inside the day has been shifted. You are no longer standing where the day begins. You are standing where the day is managed. And very few people notice that this is where a different kind of exhaustion begins. Not exhaustion from doing too much, but exhaustion from no longer feeling like you are the one living the day. There are days when you get a lot done. You solve many problems. You handle many tasks. And yet, at night, you can't clearly remember where you were inside that day. You remember the work, but you don't remember yourself. This isn't because you lack focus. It's because you've been in reaction mode for too long. When you live in that mode long enough, your mind learns something dangerous. It learns that it doesn't need to wait for awareness. It can run the day on its own. From that point on, the day begins without you ever fully arriving. You are there, but not in the position of choosing. Stoicism doesn't spend much time talking about mornings. It speaks to something deeper. Protecting a small inner space that the world is not meant to take first. Not because the world is wrong. Not because people are the problem. But because if you don't hold that space, what is familiar will hold it for you. Not with intention, with momentum. You don't lose the right to start your day in one dramatic moment. You lose it in many small moments when you are not fully present. Maybe the real question isn't, what should I do this morning to be more productive? Maybe the real question is, am I stepping into my day or am I being placed into it? Because the difference isn't in the action, it's in the position. Are you the one who begins or the one who receives? It's only a small moment of difference, but it creates a very different direction. When you don't start your day from an inner position, life quickly moves you into a different mode. Not a mode of choosing, a mode of reacting. You don't decide where the day is going. You simply deal with what shows up. Work shows up, you react. Messages show up, you react. Requests show up, you react. From the outside, you look busy, responsible, productive. But at a deeper level, you are no longer leading your day. You are moving to the rhythm of what's outside of you. Reaction mode has a quiet danger. It makes you feel like you're in control, when in reality, you're just keeping up. Keeping up with work, keeping up with people, keeping up with expectations, keeping up with what's already been placed in front of you. You don't sit down and ask, what rhythm do I want to live in today? You only ask, what needs to be handled today? And when that becomes the main question, your life slowly gets built out of events, not out of choices. Something very subtle happens here. When you live in reaction long enough, you begin to mistake it for who you are. You say, I'm just a tense person. I'm just someone who has to move fast. I'm just someone who can't really relax. But very often, that's not who you are. That's who you had to become to survive a certain season of your life. And when that season is over, the way of living stays. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. In reaction mode, you slowly lose the ability to tell what truly matters from what is just noise. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels like it has to be handled now. And when everything is urgent, you lose touch with your own natural rhythm. Not the rhythm of your calendar, not the rhythm of your job, but the rhythm your body and mind can actually live inside of long term. Many people are not exhausted from doing too much. They are exhausted from never having space to not react. There is no moment in the day where they are not in a role of handling work, handling other people's emotions, handling expectations, handling pressure. And slowly, they themselves become another task to manage. Here's a very real example. There are days when you complete a lot. Your list gets almost fully checked off. From the outside, you look effective, but at night, you feel something strange. You did a lot, but you're not sure you actually lived. You remember the tasks, but you don't remember moments where you were truly present with yourself. That's not because you don't care. It's because your entire day was built out of reaction. When you live in this mode long enough, you start to believe something quietly. This is just what life is. Always rushed, always tense, always trying to keep up. You no longer think, I'm reacting. You think, this is just who I am. This is where many people lose their sense of choice without realizing it. No one takes it from you. You give it away slowly, each time you enter a day without standing in the position of leading it. Reaction is not always wrong. There are times when reacting helps you survive. There are seasons when reacting helps you get through. But when reacting becomes your default way of living, you are no longer living by direction. You are living by pressure. And pressure has no destination. It only has continuation. Maybe you don't need to change your schedule. Maybe you don't need to change your job. Maybe you don't need to change your responsibilities. But one small thing can begin to change. Your position inside the day. Not what you do, but where you are standing when everything begins to move. Are you the one setting the rhythm, or are you the one chasing it? Just seeing that clearly is already the beginning of stepping out of reaction mode. And that's where a very small kind of freedom starts to return. Over time, something deeper begins to happen. Reaction is no longer just a way you move through the day. It becomes a story about who you are. Not a story you consciously chose. A story that slowly formed because it was repeated often enough. You don't just say, I'm under pressure today. You start to say, I'm a stressed person. You don't just say, this week is intense. You start to say, I'm someone who always has too much on my plate. A temporary state quietly becomes a permanent identity. And once something becomes identity, you stop questioning it. You stop seeing it as something you're in. You start seeing it as something you are. This is one of the most powerful shifts the mind makes, not because it's true, but because it feels stable. Your mind prefers a familiar story over an uncertain one, even if that familiar story keeps you tired, keeps you tense, keeps you small inside your own life. There is a strange comfort in saying, that's just how I am. Because then you no longer have to ask, how did I get here? Or what would it mean to stand somewhere else? Identity can become a kind of emotional furniture. You arrange your life around it. You make room for it. You stop noticing how heavy it is. Here's the quiet danger. When reaction becomes identity, you stop seeing alternatives, not because they don't exist, but because they no longer feel like they belong to you. A calmer rhythm feels unrealistic. A slower morning feels irresponsible. A different way of responding feels unsafe. Not logically unsafe, emotionally unsafe. Because your nervous system has learned this version of me is how I survive. So even when survival is no longer the issue, the pattern stays. You're no longer protecting yourself from something real. You're protecting a version of yourself that was built for a different time. Many people think they are afraid of change, but often they are not afraid of change. They are afraid of losing a familiar identity, even if that identity hurts, even if that identity exhausts them, even if that identity no longer fits their life. Letting go of a pattern is not just letting go of a habit. It can feel like letting go of who you are. That's why people can understand intellectually that something isn't healthy and still stay in it. Not because they are weak, but because the pattern is holding their sense of self together. Here's a very real example. Someone who has lived for years in pressure often feels uneasy when things slow down. Not relaxed, uneasy. When there's no urgent problem to solve, they don't feel free. They feel lost. Their body is used to being needed. Their mind is used to being on alert. Without that, there's a strange emptiness. So they unconsciously create urgency. They overthink. They add pressure. They find something to react to. Not because life requires it, but because their identity does. I'm someone who handles things. I'm someone who's always on. I'm someone who can't afford to slow down. Those sentences don't describe reality. They describe a pattern that became a name. This is where many people misunderstand themselves. They think, this is my personality. This is my nature. This is just how I'm wired. But very often it's not wiring. It's repetition. The mind learns by exposure. What you live in long enough starts to feel like who you are, not because it is, but because it's familiar. And familiarity has a strong voice. It speaks quietly. It says, don't question this. This is you. The cost of this is not just emotional, it's existential. Because when identity is built on reaction, your life is shaped around managing pressure, not choosing direction. You make decisions based on what's urgent, not on what's meaningful. You define success as keeping up, not as being aligned. You don't ask, is this the life I'm choosing? You ask, how do I handle this next thing? And slowly, a whole life can be built without anyone ever really choosing it. What makes this difficult to see is that it often looks like strength. You're dependable. You're capable. You get things done. People rely on you. Systems rely on you. Roles rely on you. From the outside, it looks like you're holding everything together. From the inside, you may not remember when you last felt like you were choosing instead of coping. This is not about blaming yourself. This is about seeing something clearly. The moment you see that a state has been mistaken for an identity, a small crack appears in the pattern. Not a dramatic change, not a full reset, just a quiet question. What if this is something I learned, not something I am? That question alone creates distance between you and the pattern. And in that distance, choice begins to exist again. Not choice about everything, just choice about position, where you stand inside your own day, where you stand inside your own story. You don't have to erase who you've been. That version of you had a purpose. It helped you survive. It helped you function. It helped you get here. But survival is not meant to be permanent identity. At some point, the question becomes quieter and deeper. Is this still the version of me that needs to run my life? Or is it just the version that learned to? Seeing that difference is not the end of the pattern, but it is the end of believing the pattern is you. And that's where a different kind of beginning becomes possible. There is a place inside your life that rarely gets named, not because it isn't important, but because it's easy to lose without noticing. It's the place where you decide what deserves your attention before the world decides for you. Not the big decisions, not life goals, not 5-year plans. The small, invisible decision where your mind stands when the day begins to move. This is not about control, it's about position. If you don't choose a position, you are placed into one. Not by someone else, by whatever is loudest, by whatever is most familiar, by whatever has trained you to respond first. Many people think they are overwhelmed by life, but very often they are overwhelmed by not having a protected inner place where life is allowed to wait. Not forever, just long enough for you to arrive. Without that space, everything has equal weight. Every message feels important. Every request feels urgent. Every problem feels like it must be handled now, not because it truly must, but because there is no inner boundary to tell the difference. When you don't hold that boundary, your nervous system becomes the decision maker. And the nervous system doesn't choose meaning. It chooses safety. Safety looks like responding quickly, staying alert, not missing anything, not falling behind. That's not living. That's managing threat, even when there is no real threat anymore. Here is something very subtle. When you live without an inner position, your life becomes shaped by what interrupts you, not by what matters most, not by what aligns with you, but by what is loud enough to take your attention. The structure of your day starts to mirror the structure of the world. Fragmented, urgent, reactive. You move from one thing to the next without ever fully landing anywhere. You are present everywhere, but grounded nowhere. This is why so many people feel busy and yet strangely disconnected from their own life. They are in it, but not standing inside it. There is a difference between being in your life and being positioned inside your life. Being in your life means you show up, you respond, you handle, you manage. Being positioned inside your life means there is a quiet place where you decide what enters first. Not perfectly, not all the time, but enough to remind your system, I am here. I am not just reacting. This is not about slowing everything down. It's about not letting everything in at once. Because when everything enters at once, nothing is truly chosen. Many people believe that freedom comes from having fewer demands, but very often, freedom comes from having a stronger inner boundary, not a wall, a position, a place inside where you stand before the world reaches you. Without that, even a simple life feels heavy. With that, even a full life can feel grounded. There is a quiet grief that comes from living too long without that inner position. It's the grief of realizing you've been available to everything except yourself. Available to work, available to pressure, available to other people's needs, available to expectations, but rarely available to the part of you that decides what kind of day you are actually stepping into. Not what you will do, but how you will be while you do it. Here's a very human example. Two people can have the same workload, the same schedule, the same responsibilities. One feels constantly drained. The other feels tired, but still connected to themselves. The difference is rarely discipline. It's rarely motivation. The difference is often whether they have an inner place where they begin the day from. One begins from inside. The other begins from outside. One sets a tone. The other absorbs a tone. Over time, that creates two very different lives, even with the same circumstances. When you don't protect that inner position, your sense of self becomes negotiable. It shifts with the room you're in. It shifts with the people you're around. It shifts with the pressure of the moment. You are not unstable, you are unanchored. And an unanchored self is always pulled by the strongest current. Not because it's weak, but because it has no fixed point. This is where something important becomes clear. What you think is stress is often not just stress. It's the experience of being moved without choosing where you stand. It's the feeling of being positioned instead of positioning yourself. That's why rest alone doesn't always fix it. You can sleep, you can take time off, you can unplug, and still come back to the same feeling. Because the issue was never only exhaustion, it was the absence of an inner place to return to. This is not something you fix with a technique. It's something you reclaim with awareness. Not by forcing change, but by noticing where you stand when the day begins to push. Noticing when you are being pulled. Noticing when you are absorbing instead of choosing. That noticing itself is the beginning of position. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look impressive, but it quietly changes who leads the day. You don't need to win against the world. You don't need to control everything. You only need to protect one small place inside where you arrive first, where the world waits a moment, where urgency waits a moment, where pressure waits a moment. Not so you can escape, but so you can enter your life instead of being thrown into it. That small pause is not weakness. It is the difference between being carried by your life and standing inside it. And over time, that difference becomes the line between a life that happens to you and a life that feels like it belongs to you.